Hello there. The battle lines are being drawn across England between the enforcers and those who believe in free will and the rights of an individual over their own body. And there can only be one winner. Those words by Boris Johnson of having a national conversation on compulsory medical interventions has opened a veritable Pandora's box. And he must have known he was opening it, otherwise he and his advisers are extremely stupid. And what's he being driven by? A wish to improve domestic health in England, because that's where Boris has authority in this matter, or a wider agenda? Now I'll make it clear, there are two options, and there can only be one winner. There will be no half and half. Either freedoms and individual human rights are fully respected, or a new age of creeping tyranny begins on the basis of the greater good. And be in no doubt, if we choose the latter, the greater good will then begin to take prominence in more and more areas of our lives. The individual will matter less and less. It will be a slow ratchet of tyranny that gradually strangles our freedoms. And the start of that ratchet is this concept of punishing the non-compliant with restrictions so that the clean people can go about their daily lives without being forced to be in the company of the unclean, those who have chosen to take a different path. And this is something that the broadcaster Andrew Neil has pushed in an article in the Daily Mail. He says that by using health passes and shutting the non-compliant out of many areas of society, more people will be forced to bend to the will of the greater good. And he makes light of having to produce one's papers to enter establishments and enjoy the freedoms that we once freely enjoyed. But no more. It's also easy to keep showing your pass as you wander about from shop to pub, he suggests. Now Neil does go on to say that he is not in favour of fines and compulsion to achieve an increased uptake. Just making the unclean work, pay their taxes and get shut out of society is as far as he would go. But surely he understands that there is always mission creep. While even the smallest hardcore of refuseniks exists, the call will come for ever more stringent restrictions, until all that is left is sheer brute force. But some people have gone further than Andrew Neil. Tom Harwood of GB News tweeted that the non-compliant who get the bug and end up in hospital will now have to foot their own medical bills in Singapore. Not a bad idea. I assume he would still charge them tax as well, though. And he's not the only one pushing this concept. Now, if we go down the route of starting to restrict the unclean, even just a little bit, then we are on the path to ever more restrictions, then to fines, then to prison, and then to force. It is a one-way ratchet. And once the establishment has worked out how to do this effectively, then it will be expanded into more areas of everyone's lives. Once there, the state can decide what medical procedures you must take and who must get them, as well as who they can deny them to. How long before people are denied expensive treatment to save money and resources for the greater good? That already happens occasionally within the NHS, but how much easier this would make it. If we have to punish people to make them compliant over this today, then what are we going to be punishing people for tomorrow to make them compliant over? Their drinking habits, or smoking, or overeating? And you don't think that won't happen? Why not? Mission creep always occurs, always. And who's going to stop it in the face of the argument that it's being done for the greater good? It's no good agreeing to this, then arguing to not do it for something else later. That's just hypocrisy. Now, writing in the Telegraph, Nigel Farage takes the view that any of this two-tier discrimination is bad. Banning the unclean from public buildings, he says, is highly discriminatory and very dangerous. It represents the erosion of basic liberties in Western Europe. And he's absolutely correct. And he also goes on to ask why the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who is pushing for all these restrictions and more in the EU, hasn't made clear that she has a conflict of interest where her husband is concerned because of his involvement in biotech. If the partner of an economic policymaker worked at an investment bank, we would expect that to be discussed, he writes. Now, despite the mildness of the new arrival on the scene, Zero, Mick and Ron, expect to start seeing horrendous stories that they've caused the NHS to be overwhelmed. And that's when the screeching calls for mandatory interventions, passes and restrictions will begin. And the government, media and social media will begin the massive drive towards tyranny. All for your health and safety, of course. As far as I'm concerned, we now have a choice between two diametrically opposing outcomes, liberty or tyranny. And given what I've seen, tyranny has a big head start. Moving on. Now, do you remember the AUKUS kerfuffle that sent Macron into a massive teddy-throwing fit, where the UK and US sneaked a nuclear submarine deal with Australia under his radar and trashed a massive French-Australia deal? Well, the European Union has also been sent a message by the Australians. They've just dumped all their EU-designed Taipan military helicopters and opted to go for 40 US Black Hawk helicopters instead. Now, these 47 Taipan helicopters that Australia procured from the EU were meant to have been in service for another 16 years, but have been so plagued with unreliability that they've been dropped. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said, "The Taipans weren't meeting their marks, simple as that. And we want to make sure that our defence forces have the best possible equipment to defend this country, and the Black Hawks will provide that." That's Australia definitely off of the EU Christmas card list then. But there are some other issues developing around the world that also deserve looking at. But before I get onto that, I just want to say a massive thank you to all my Super Thanks, Patreon and PayPal supporters, as well as those that do buy a mug with my mug on it. Links in the descriptions box below. You really do help me keep this channel going. So while we're all fixated on Boris's problems over his Christmas parties and his push for a national conversation, there are events around the globe that demand equal consideration. And the first is, what's going on in and around the Ukraine? The Russian President Vladimir Putin is continuing to increase the numbers of troops to the east of the Ukraine, with Western military experts and politicians getting ever more nervous that Russia really could be about to mount an attack. And one of the latest comments by Putin will add to that concern. Right now, eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, is held by pro-Russian separatists fighting Ukrainian troops for control of the area. And Putin said yesterday that what is happening to the Russian-speaking people in that region certainly looks like genocide. Could that be his get-out clause for an invasion, preventing genocide? NATO allies are also a bit twitched because the US President Joe Biden appears to be taking a softer line with Russia than many want. Moscow claims its military manoeuvres are down to NATO crowding up Russia's borders, and that they're worried that Ukraine will end up being filled with NATO troops and hardware, right on the border with Russia. This led Joe Biden to say that he had listened to this and that he would hold some talks to ascertain whether or not we can work out any accommodation as it relates to bringing down the temperature along the Eastern Front. and some see this as a form of appeasement that could keep Ukraine out of NATO, for example. Russia has also reportedly blocked off the Kerch Strait to merchant shipping and also caused a Ukrainian naval vessel to divert. The Kerch Strait is a strip of water a few miles wide that lies to the east of the Russian-held Crimea that separates it from Russia. To the north of the strait is the Sea of Assos, and to the south is the larger Black Sea. Russia is definitely applying pressure on Ukraine and on NATO, but his real intentions are so far not clear. Many are hoping he just wants to get some geopolitical concessions out of the West and the Ukraine. But if they are wrong, we could see Russian troops advance into eastern Ukraine early in the new year. Then there's the matter of Taiwan and China. China claims Taiwan is a territory within China. Taiwan says it is independent. The response from Beijing to that is that it will invade and impose itself if it has to. But as Chinese influence grows around the world, Taiwan's position becomes more precarious. And today sees Nicaragua change its previous position and no longer recognises Taiwan as an independent country. Nicaragua now recognises the Republic of China as the ruler of Taiwan. In a statement, the Nicaraguan Foreign Office said, "The government of the Republic of Nicaragua today breaks diplomatic relations with Taiwan and ceases to have any contact or official relationship. The People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government that represents all of China, and Taiwan is an inalienable part of the Chinese territory." Now this means that only 14 countries around the world now see Taiwan as a sovereign country in its own right, and they are Guatemala, Honduras, Haiti, Paraguay, Eswatini, Tuvalu, Nauru, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, Belize, Marshall Islands, Palau, Vatican City. So, no UK, no USA, no Canada, no Australia, no New Zealand. That means the Five Eyes do not recognise Taiwan as a country, nor does the EU or any of its 27 member states, and Taiwan has not been accepted as a member of the United Nations. So my question is, what legal basis would there be for the UK, for example, to assist Taiwan if it were overrun or threatened to be overrun by Chinese troops? Or maybe our Foreign Office people are hoping it would be a short, sharp event that we can make complaints to the UN later about, and then get on with business as normal with the dilemma of Taiwan finally and comprehensively dealt with. And now to Julian Assange. The High Court has overturned an earlier ruling that he can't be extradited to the US for health reasons, with the reason given by the High Court that the US has now given assurances that Assange's health problems will be respected. This means the WikiLeaks founder has moved a step closer to facing US justice, although as I understand it, he does intend to appeal to the Supreme Court. Amnesty International has called the judgment a travesty of justice and says that the assurances from the US authorities were deeply flawed, with their Europe director saying this judgment poses a grave threat to press freedom both in the United States and abroad. Julian Assange's fiancée Stella Morris has issued an impassioned plea outside the court saying that Assange has been locked up for 11 years already, with 2.5 of them spent in Belmarsh prison. For how long can this go on, she asks. Now I take it that the court hasn't extradited Assange themselves. That's now up to the Home Secretary. And the BBC reports that judges ordered the case must return to Westminster Magistrates Court for a district judge to send it formally to the Home Secretary Priti Patel. Personally, I wonder if Assange would ever get a fair trial in the US now, given all the time and publicity. So what's your opinion on liberty versus tyranny? Please like and comment below. Please subscribe and like this video, buy a mug and support me on Patreon or PayPal, and thank you for watching.